What if I told you that a single move from Canada could bring the world's most powerful tech company to its knees? No, this isn't a movie plot, this is happening right now. Brace yourself, because the stakes are higher than you think. For decades, the U.S. has dominated the global stage, making the rules of trade and economics. But what happens when one country finally says, enough is enough? In an unexpected move, Canada has shaken the foundations of global trade, sending shockwaves all the way to Silicon Valley. This video will dive into how a simple toll on U.S. trucks passing through British Columbia set off a chain reaction, one that's cost the U.S. tech industry hundreds of billions. Stick around to find out why Donald Trump never saw this coming, and how it could change everything we know about international trade. For decades, Canada has played the role of the quiet and diplomatic neighbor, respecting trade agreements and maintaining good relations with its southern neighbor, the United States. But the patience of this neighbor ran out when Donald Trump escalated the trade war, slapping tariffs on Canadian goods and threatening its industries. It wasn't just about trade, it was about sovereignty. Many Canadians felt that Trump was trying to erode their country's independence, and this wasn't something they were willing to let slide. Then British Columbia made a bold move under the leadership of Premier David Eby, signaling to the world that Canada wasn't just going to sit back and take these hits anymore. He delivered a speech that would go down in history. Eby didn't just announce tolls on U.S. freight trucks passing through British Columbia. He declared defiance. He said, "We are doing all we can to detach from the U.S., to move to other markets, and to break free from the whims of one person in the White House." It was more than just symbolic. Eby's move was calculated. It was a direct response to the tariffs imposed by Trump's administration on Canadian goods like aluminum and steel, industries that were vital to Canada's economy. The U.S. claimed these tariffs were in place to protect American jobs, but to Ottawa, they felt like an economic chokehold designed to make Canada dependent on American manufacturing. The U.S. wasn't the only target. British Columbia wasn't merely defending trade, it was setting the stage for a complete overhaul of Canada's economic strategy. David Eby's first step was strategic tolls on U.S. freight trucks. These trucks used British Columbia as a transit corridor to Alaska, saving time and money. By imposing fees on these shipments, Eby wasn't just raising revenue, he was applying pressure on the U.S. to show that Canada wasn't afraid to retaliate. This toll wasn't just about money, it was about sending a message. If the U.S. wants to play hardball, Canada can do the same. At the same time, British Columbia was putting in motion a much bigger plan, an economic resilience strategy aimed at reducing reliance on U.S. trade. The government introduced incentives for Canadian businesses to prioritize interprovincial trade instead of relying on American imports and exports. This wasn't just a temporary retaliation, it was a long-term structural shift to shield Canada from the unpredictability of American tariffs. But there was more to it. British Columbia also began to implement low-carbon fuel mandates that would require domestic sourcing of fuel, cutting out American suppliers almost entirely. This policy wasn't just about creating a sustainable future for Canada, it was a move to regain control over its economic destiny. And as these changes were taking place, the world was beginning to pay attention. While Canada was fortifying its economy, something much bigger was unfolding, a chain reaction triggered by uncertainty. Investors hate uncertainty, and Trump's trade war created plenty of it. His unpredictability one day imposing tariffs, the next threatening sanctions was throwing the financial world into chaos. But one sector was feeling the heat more than others: technology. For years, Silicon Valley thrived on a delicate balance of global supply chains. Companies like NVIDIA relied on international cooperation, sourcing materials from countries like China and Canada. But Trump's push for economic nationalism was threatening that system. In particular, NVIDIA, the world's biggest AI chipmaker, was about to lose more than just market share. It was about to lose $1 trillion. NVIDIA's downfall was set into motion by Trump's chip export restrictions aimed at slowing down China's AI development. With the stroke of a pen, the U.S. tightened the screws on China's access to advanced AI semiconductors, blocking companies like NVIDIA from selling their most powerful chips to Beijing. The goal was simple: stop China's AI progress. But the result was far from what the Trump administration expected. Instead of crippling China, the sanctions backfired, causing massive uncertainty in the tech sector. Investors began to panic as the U.S. was inadvertently cutting off not just China, but its own tech companies' access to critical markets and materials. The fear was real. If the U.S. was willing to cut off chip sales to China, what would stop China from cutting off the raw materials needed for these chips? NVIDIA was in trouble. The company, once valued at a staggering $3.66 trillion, began to plummet. On January 27th, NVIDIA lost $589 billion in a single day, a loss that shocked the entire tech world. But that wasn't the end. Over the next 2 months, NVIDIA's market value continued to slide, dropping by $1 trillion. As NVIDIA's stock tanked, it wasn't just a tech sector issue, it was a full-blown economic crisis. What started with a small retaliation over truck tolls in British Columbia had spiraled into a global market correction. Wall Street had seen market corrections before, but nothing on this scale. The irony here was striking. Trump's trade war wasn't supposed to hurt American companies, it was supposed to protect them. But now, the crown jewel of America's tech industry, the company leading the AI revolution, was on its knees. So, how did this small act of defiance by British Columbia connect to NVIDIA's downfall? The answer lies in globalization. NVIDIA had relied on a complex, interconnected supply chain. Taiwan's TSMC manufactured the most advanced AI chips. China provided critical raw materials, and Canada supplied vital components like nickel and aluminum for cooling systems. But as Canada retaliated, it sent a warning sign to the world. America's closest allies weren't standing by anymore, they were fighting back. As British Columbia imposed tolls, it became clear that other countries weren't going to sit idly by. China, in particular, made its move. China unveiled its own AI chip, D, one that didn't rely on NVIDIA's most advanced processors. This wasn't just about China building its own tech, it was a direct challenge to U.S. trade restrictions. Soon after, reports emerged that Chinese tech firms had found workarounds to obtain NVIDIA chips despite the U.S. sanctions. This development was a shock to investors. If China didn't need NVIDIA, what was stopping the rest of the world from moving on? The panic was real. Hedge funds dumped NVIDIA stock, fearing that the AI revolution was no longer an American monopoly. The story of how Canada's tolls on U.S. trucks set off a domino effect, leading to NVIDIA's downfall highlights a bigger shift in the global economy. America's global dominance was no longer guaranteed. As countries like China and Canada took steps to reduce reliance on the U.S., global economic power was shifting. This has real-world implications for everyday life. Technology prices could rise as supply chains become more fragmented. Manufacturers could seek alternative sources for chips, causing delays and raising costs for smartphones, computers, and cars. At the same time, Canada's economic independence plan could pave the way for more local production of goods, creating jobs within Canada, but also disrupting American supply chains. For consumers, it means higher prices and possibly longer wait times for products that rely on U.S. imports. The question remains, will Trump back down from his trade war? Will the U.S. shift its policies to regain the trust of its allies and protect its industries? Only time will tell. However, one thing is clear: Canada's response to the U.S. trade war is part of a larger shift in the global economic order. Countries are less willing to be pushed around by America, and this has wide-reaching consequences for the tech industry, global trade, and everyday consumers. In the end, the fallout from a toll on U.S. trucks in British Columbia led to a recalibration of the global supply chain, challenging America's economic dominance. What started as a regional issue has now become a global one, and investors are waking up to the reality that the U.S. might not be the dominant economic force it once was. Do you think this shift in power is a positive one for the global economy? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay updated on this unfolding story. HTT DK News 11,071,561 eBay. Us News pissed off Trump. B. HTTPS www.focus.com. News 2,732,690 I. Major trade and energy deals with China, including discussions on accepting the yuan for oil transactions. If Riyadh decides to price oil in yuan, this would directly challenge the petrodollar system and could have profound implications for the U.S. dollar. The political tension between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, especially over issues like human rights concerns and disputes regarding OPEC production cuts, has strained their alliance. On the other hand, China offers a more stable trade partnership with fewer political strings attached. If Saudi Arabia moves forward with yuan-based oil pricing, it would send a clear signal to other oil-producing nations to diversify their reserve currencies, further challenging the dollar's dominance in global trade. The implications of Saudi Arabia's decision could be far-reaching. If the petrodollar system collapses, the price of oil and energy could become more volatile, potentially leading to fluctuating gas prices. People around the world could feel the impact through higher transportation costs, inflation, and economic instability, especially in countries dependent on oil imports. Another factor eroding the U.S. dollar's dominance is the rise of alternative reserves. For years, the dollar was seen as the global reserve currency, but this is no longer the case. Central banks around the world have been stockpiling gold at record levels. According to the IMF data, global gold reserves reached an all-time high in 2023. For example, China added over 225 tons of gold to its reserves as part of its strategy to reduce its reliance on the U.S. dollar. Similarly, Russia and India have also been boosting their gold reserves. In addition to gold, countries are increasingly exploring the potential of cryptocurrencies and digital currencies. Countries like El Salvador have adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, while others are experimenting with central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. This trend signifies a shift away from traditional fiat currencies, as nations look for ways to protect themselves from the financial risks associated with the U.S. dollar. The rise of alternative reserves means that inflationary risks associated with the U.S. dollar could become more pronounced. If more countries switch to using gold or cryptocurrency, the global financial system could become more fragmented, potentially leading to currency volatility. This could directly affect individual savings, investment strategies, and financial security. For everyday consumers, this could lead to increased costs for goods and services as the value of the dollar fluctuates. The Federal Reserve has been playing a crucial role in the dollar's current predicament. Its decision to raise interest rates aggressively in an effort to curb inflation has had unintended consequences. On the one hand, these higher rates have attracted foreign capital into U.S. bonds, offering better returns. On the other hand, rising interest rates have triggered a massive sell-off of existing bonds, creating a paradox. As interest rates rise, bond prices fall, which is a basic market mechanism. Another problem is the rising cost of servicing the U.S.'s $36.56 trillion national debt. As interest rates increase, so do the payments on this debt, which creates fiscal pressure on the U.S. budget. If foreign bondholders continue to sell U.S. bonds, the U.S. could face a fiscal crisis, where rising debt payments crowd out other government spending, potentially leading to political and economic instability. The Fed's interest rate hikes and the potential fiscal crisis in the U.S. could lead to higher borrowing costs for individuals. Mortgages, student loans, and credit card interest rates could rise, impacting household budgets. Moreover, the government's fiscal challenges could result in cuts to public services, affecting healthcare, education, and social security programs, which many individuals rely on. Following Brexit, the United Kingdom has been reassessing its economic and financial strategy. Historically, the UK was one of the closest allies of the US, but the political and economic shifts brought on by Brexit have forced the UK to seek financial independence. A key part of this strategy is reducing reliance on US bonds. The UK has been focusing on strengthening trade relations with the European Union and Asia, especially with China. By diversifying reserves and reducing exposure to U.S. bonds, the UK aims to reduce the risks associated with its reliance on the US dollar. For the average consumer, this shift could lead to a reduction in the strength of the pound against other currencies, which could impact import prices and inflation in the UK. Additionally, job markets and trade could experience volatility as the UK seeks to establish new financial relationships outside of its long-standing reliance on the US. The US is facing significant political. Did you know that Trump's tariffs sent the US dollar plummeting by 3.5% and added up to $100 billion in additional costs for American consumers? Import prices skyrocketed, and trade wars broke out across the globe. But how did this happen, and what does it mean for your daily life? Stay tuned to uncover how these tariff policies reshaped the economy and made everyday goods more expensive. Back in 2018, Donald Trump's trade wars started shaking up the global economy, particularly with the imposition of tariffs on Chinese imports. The US dollar lost nearly 3.5% of its value within a year, sending shockwaves across international markets. But the impact didn't stop there. American consumers were hit with an extra $100 billion in costs, as prices of everyday goods like electronics, appliances, and food jumped significantly. In this video, we're diving into the hard numbers to show you how these tariffs triggered price hikes, disrupted global supply chains, and impacted everything from your groceries to your gas bill. By the end, you'll understand how these policy decisions still have a massive impact on what you pay at the checkout and why the effects are still being felt in 2025. In early 2025, Trump's administration introduced a sweeping set of tariffs with the goal of addressing trade imbalances, protecting U.S. jobs, and challenging the dominance of countries like China in the global market. On February 4, 2025, Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on imports from Mexico and Canada, while also imposing a 10% tariff on Chinese goods. These tariffs were sold to the American public as a way to level the playing field and bring back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. While the administration's aim was to revive U.S. industry, the reality was far from what they had promised. According to a 2019 study by the Journal of Economic Perspectives, the initial tariffs resulted in $3.2 billion per month in extra costs for U.S. consumers. The tariffs created immediate trade tensions, especially with Canada and Mexico, which retaliated by imposing tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods and consumer products. Meanwhile, China fought back with counter tariffs, which escalated into a full-blown trade war. The result? Massive disruptions in the global supply chain and unpredictable shifts in market sentiment. Investors weren't sure what to expect, and this market uncertainty pushed companies to hold off on investments and postpone hiring plans. The immediate fallout of Trump's tariffs didn't just affect China or U.S. Neighbors like Canada and Mexico. The global economy felt the effects too. By March 5, 2025, the U.S. dollar index saw a significant drop of 4.5%, the most significant decline in recent years. The value of the dollar weakened dramatically as both investors and foreign governments started to question the stability of U.S. economic policies. According to Bloomberg, the dollar index could potentially drop by another 4% in the second quarter of 2025 following a series of retaliatory tariffs from China. In total, the dollar lost 9% of its value within just the first 9 months of 2025. One key factor behind the dollar's decline was the fear that these tariffs would cause a slowdown in U.S. economic growth. When the U.S. places tariffs on foreign goods, those costs are often passed down to U.S. consumers. Products like electronics, clothing, and cars that rely on overseas production started to rise in price. This led to inflation, a hidden tax that hits everyone, especially middle-class Americans. The dollar's drop caused price hikes on imported goods across the board. Prices for imported cars increased by 6 to 8% as a direct result of tariffs, while the cost of consumer electronics, especially smartphones and laptops, rose by an average of 12%. For the average person, this meant higher grocery bills, expensive electronics, and rising fuel costs. Imagine paying more for your phone because parts were sourced from China, or having to spend more at the gas pump because tariffs made oil more expensive. On top of that, the inflationary pressure of these rising costs strained household budgets, especially for working families. Food prices jumped by 3.4% in 2025. See, the sharpest rise in nearly a decade, with some essentials like meat and vegetables going up by 6 to 8%. By March 8, 2025, the situation became even more volatile. Trump doubled down on the tariff strategy, increasing tariffs on Chinese goods from 10% to 20%, and targeting Mexican dairy products and Canadian lumber. This further fueled the trade war between the U.S. and China, while Mexico and Canada retaliated by imposing new tariffs on U.S. exports. The stock market responded negatively to the ongoing trade war. In fact, the S&P 500 saw a drop of 1.8% between March and May 2025, a market correction not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. The Dow Jones Industrial Average experienced significant losses, dropping more than 1,300 points in 2 days. The uncertainty surrounding U.S. tariffs left investors in the dark about the future of U.S. trade policy and its impact on the economy. U.S. agricultural exports to China plummeted by $6 billion in 2025 alone due to the tariffs, with soybeans, a major U.S. export, losing 50% of its market share to competitors like Brazil. For many people, the uncertainty in the stock market meant that retirement accounts lost value, and people started to question their investment choices. If you had invested in the stock market or were relying on 401ks and other retirement accounts, you likely felt the pressure of volatility. For the average worker, it meant fewer job opportunities as companies cut back on hiring or delayed expansion plans. Meanwhile, business owners faced the challenge of higher tariffs on supplies, causing them to raise prices to cover increased costs. Small businesses in particular had a hard time adjusting to the tariffs, and many shut down due to being unable to absorb the increased costs. By mid-2025, the U.S. dollar faced a further challenge from international powers like Russia, Brazil, and China. These nations began to reduce their reliance on the dollar for trade transactions, using local currencies or creating their own currency agreements. As the BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa began to push for a system not based on the U.S. dollar, the global landscape began to shift in ways the U.S. hadn't anticipated. China's share of global trade conducted in its currency, the yuan, jumped from 2.7% in 2024 to 6.1% in 2025, signaling a shift away from reliance on the U.S. dollar. Additionally, Russia's ruble saw a 12% increase in global trade use during this period. A weaker U.S. dollar means higher interest rates, especially on things like mortgages and car loans. If you're someone with a mortgage or thinking about buying a house, the cost of borrowing will likely rise. As the U.S. loses its grip on the global financial system, foreign investors might be less willing to buy U.S. bonds, leading to higher borrowing costs for both the government and regular citizens. Additionally, the decline of the dollar affects international travel. Americans used to enjoy a strong dollar when traveling abroad, but with the dollar's diminished strength, foreign vacations became more expensive. Whether it's tourism or business travel, the overall cost of going abroad increased as a result of the dollar's depreciation. Trump's tariffs were initially aimed at bringing jobs back to the U.S. and protecting American interests. However, the long-term effects revealed a different story. Manufacturing jobs did not increase as expected, and the U.S. economy faced higher costs across the board. While some industries saw short-term benefits, the broader global economic instability created by the tariffs continues to reverberate today. U.S. manufacturing output rose by only 1.3% from 2025 to 2026, which is far below the 5% increase that was promised during the tariff push. Moreover, GDP growth slowed to 1.5% annually, significantly below the anticipated 2.3%. The tariffs created a new economic reality, where the cost of living continues to rise, wages have stagnated, and economic insecurity has become a normal part of life. Many Americans are still dealing with the fallout from higher prices, fewer job opportunities, and a sense that the country's economic policies have left them behind. In the end, Trump's tariff policies have changed the course of the global economy. From a falling dollar to increased prices and a slowdown in global trade, these policies have created a ripple effect that affects the average American in unexpected ways. As the world continues to adapt to these changes, one thing is clear: economic policies matter more than ever, and the consequences of poorly executed tariffs can be far-reaching. If you found this analysis insightful, like the video, subscribe to stay updated, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. A crucial role in the dollar's current predicament, its decision to raise interest rates aggressively in an effort to curb inflation, has had unintended consequences. On the one hand, these higher rates have attracted foreign capital into U.S. bonds, offering better returns. On the other hand, rising interest rates have triggered a massive sell-off of existing bonds, creating a paradox. As interest rates rise, bond prices fall, which is a basic market mechanism. Another problem is the rising cost of servicing the U.S.'s $36.56 trillion national debt. As interest rates increase, so do the payments on this debt, which creates fiscal pressure on the U.S. budget. If foreign bondholders continue to sell U.S. bonds, the U.S. could face a fiscal crisis, where rising debt payments crowd out other government spending, potentially leading to political and economic instability. The Fed's interest rate hikes and the potential fiscal crisis in the U.S. could lead to higher borrowing costs for individuals. Mortgages, student loans, and credit card interest rates could rise, impacting household budgets. Moreover, the government's fiscal challenges could result in cuts to public services, affecting healthcare, education, and social security programs, which many individuals rely on. Following Brexit, the United Kingdom has been reassessing its economic and financial strategy. Historically, the UK was one of the closest allies of the US, but the political and economic shifts brought on by Brexit have forced the UK to seek financial independence. A key part of this strategy is reducing reliance on US bonds. The UK has been focusing on strengthening trade relations with the European Union and Asia, especially with China. By diversifying reserves and reducing exposure to U.S. bonds, the UK aims to reduce the risks associated with its reliance on the U.S. dollar. For the average consumer, this shift could lead to a reduction in the strength of the pound against other currencies, which could impact import prices and inflation in the UK. Additionally, job markets and trade could experience volatility as the UK seeks to establish new financial relationships outside of its long-standing reliance on the U.S. The U.S. is facing significant political instability, which is now becoming a global concern. From debt ceiling battles to government shutdowns, the dysfunction in Washington has started to affect international confidence in U.S. leadership. The Fitch downgrade of the U.S. credit rating in 2023 is a stark reminder of the financial risks posed by the country's internal dysfunction. The political gridlock in Washington can lead to uncertainty in the markets, increasing the likelihood of economic downturns and financial instability. For everyday citizens, this could result in job insecurity, economic slowdowns, and uncertainty about future government policies. Lastly, let's focus on the two biggest geopolitical challengers to U.S. dollar dominance, China and Russia. Both countries have been working to undermine the U.S. dollar's global influence by expanding trade agreements that bypass the dollar. The Belt and Road Initiative by China and Russia's move to sell oil in non-dollar currencies have furthered this agenda. If China and Russia succeed in reducing the global reliance on the U.S. dollar, we could see a shift in global trade patterns, affecting everything from prices to economic relations between countries. Consumers may experience higher costs for imports, and the value of the dollar could fluctuate unpredictably, leading to a more unstable global economy. As we've explored, the U.S. dollar's dominance is facing significant challenges from countries like Japan, Saudi Arabia, the UK, and even China and Russia. These geopolitical shifts are reshaping the global financial landscape, with massive sell-offs of U.S. bonds, alternative reserves gaining traction, and political instability in Washington threatening U.S. financial leadership. For everyday people, this means higher borrowing costs, inflation, and financial instability. The future of the dollar is uncertain, and we'll need to stay vigilant as these changes unfold. What do you think? Are we witnessing the end of dollar dominance, or can the U.S. adapt and reclaim its financial leadership? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more updates on the shifting global financial landscape. Trump's tariffs aren't protecting American jobs. They're a desperate power grab born from weakness. If you believe the U.S. can bully Canada into submission and force it to become the 50 honest state, prepare to have your mind blown by Canada's unapologetic, bold counterattack. For decades, the U.S. and Canada enjoyed a mutually beneficial, almost unbreakable trade bond. But now, amid Trump's shameless tariff threats, which he claims are designed to stop illegal immigration and drug trafficking, Canada has flipped the script. Prime Minister Trudeau, calling Trump's move a dumb trade war, has unleashed 25% retaliatory tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods. In this video, we dive deep into how Canada is not only standing its ground, but is ready to turn America's protectionist rants into a wake-up call for the entire world. Is Trump's economic bullying finally catching up with him? To understand why these changes matter, we first need to break down the economic relationship between the U.S. and Canada. These two nations share one of the world's most integrated trade relationships. Products that cross the border for assembly might make up to 8 crossings before they are fully manufactured. The automotive industry, for example, relies heavily on this back and forth exchange, with Canada supplying 89% of U.S. auto consumption. According to the latest figures, trade between the U.S. and Canada is $2.5 billion daily. The automotive sector is one of the largest contributors to this, but the trade also includes everything from minerals, essential for electric vehicle production, to agricultural products. The total economic cost of imposing tariffs on these goods is huge. It has been estimated that a 25% tariff on Canadian goods could reduce Canada's GDP by 2.5%, while the U.S. economy would shrink by 1.6%. That might sound abstract, but what does that really mean for people? Trump's tariff policy isn't new. During his first term, he imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada and Mexico, citing national security and job protection. However, his latest round of tariffs, imposed in his second term, has escalated the situation dramatically. On February 1, 2025, Trump signed executive orders that set a 25% tariff on most imports from Canada and Mexico, with a 10% tariff on Canadian energy products. His stated goal was to address what he called illegal immigration and the flow of fentanyl into the U.S., while also forcing trading partners to address trade deficits and bring manufacturing back on shore. The immediate consequences of these tariffs are starting to ripple through markets, with tariffs set to impact everything from automobiles to consumer electronics. Prices are expected to rise, and consumer behavior will adjust. Products like textile goods, automotive parts, wood products, and food items will likely become more expensive. This means that everything from the cost of your next car to the price of furniture could see an increase. Everyday items like toilet paper, canned goods, and clothing could see price hikes. Canadian agricultural products are key imports for the U.S., and rising tariffs could inflate prices at the checkout. For example, certain meats and vegetables could become pricier due to supply chain disruptions caused by the tariff wars. In a swift and unyielding move, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau labeled Trump's tariffs as unjustified and a dumb trade war aimed at destabilizing Canada's economy. Just hours after the U.S. tariffs took effect, Trudeau announced that Canada would retaliate with matching 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods. The plan is to begin immediately on $30 billion of products and then expand over the next 21 days if the U.S. tariffs are not withdrawn. This comprehensive retaliation package isn't limited to one sector, it spans consumer goods, food items, textiles, household appliances, and even targets specific politically sensitive products to put pressure on key U.S. states. Tariffs are also expected to heavily impact manufacturers. Goods like construction equipment, furniture, and home appliances are common imports from Canada. These industries rely on seamless cross-border flows of materials and machinery. For instance, a 25% tariff on Canadian machinery imports could result in a rise in production costs for U.S. manufacturers. Canadian businesses, especially those that rely on U.S. components, might struggle to absorb these additional costs, potentially resulting in layoffs or plant shutdowns. One of the most important commodities affected by this trade war is energy. The U.S. imports a significant amount of its energy from Canada, particularly oil and natural gas. Canada is the U.S.'s largest foreign supplier of crude oil, making up about 60% of U.S. crude imports. A 10% tariff on Canadian crude could increase gasoline prices by up to $0.20 to $0.40 per gallon. This could further inflate transportation costs, raising the price of goods and services across the economy. For consumers, it could mean paying more to fill up your car or higher energy bills at home. The economic impact of these tariffs varies region by region. States like Texas, Michigan, and North Dakota are especially vulnerable because they rely heavily on cross-border trade with Canada. For example, North Dakota sends 70% of its exports to Canada, making it the state most exposed to changes in this trade relationship. In contrast, states with less trade dependency, like California or Florida, will feel a less direct effect. While higher prices will hit consumers, the manufacturing sector will also feel the strain. Job losses in industries that rely on cheap imported materials are already being predicted. It's expected that 2.5% of Canadian GDP will be lost in the first year due to these tariffs, resulting in job cuts, reduced working hours, and factory slowdowns. In the U.S., companies that heavily rely on Canadian imports will face similar struggles, especially in sectors like automotive production and agriculture. The U.S.-Canada trade tensions also have significant currency implications. The Canadian dollar could weaken significantly as the trade balance shifts and demand for Canadian exports decreases. This could affect everything from tourism to international investments in Canadian businesses. Moreover, higher tariffs on machinery imports are likely to deter new investments, especially in manufacturing plants that require high-end equipment. The overall slowdown in trade could stunt both business expansion and job growth across both countries. While these tariffs might initially seem like an attempt to protect domestic industries, the broader consequences could be disastrous. Canada's energy, manufacturing, and agriculture sectors will bear the brunt of the economic slowdown. On the other hand, U.S. consumers will face higher prices, which could lead to reduced spending and weaker consumer confidence. Over time, both countries will need to restructure their trade networks and potentially seek alternative suppliers to reduce dependency on each other. But for now, the immediate fallout will hurt both economies and impact everyday lives in ways that will only become clearer as time progresses. As these tariff impacts unfold, consumers can expect higher costs for everything from basic household items to luxury goods. One potential strategy is to buy Canadian-made goods that are still relatively unaffected by the tariffs. Shifting to local suppliers could help reduce the impact of the rising costs of imported products. Additionally, monitoring price trends and adjusting household budgets to accommodate price increases on certain goods will be key. In summary, the U.S.-Canada trade war has far-reaching consequences that affect nearly every sector of the economy. Tariffs on Canadian goods and energy imports will push up prices for consumers and disrupt manufacturing on both sides of the border. The most vulnerable industries will face serious challenges, from automotive parts to energy. While these shifts might create some new economic opportunities, the immediate effects on your daily life will likely involve higher costs and changes in the availability of certain products. Remember, while these changes seem inevitable, it's crucial to stay informed and adapt your spending habits to avoid financial strain. Make sure to like and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of these ongoing economic changes. Let us know in the comments how you think these tariffs will affect you personally and what steps you're taking to prepare. What if the global financial system you've trusted for years is on the brink of collapse? The U.S. dollar, once the cornerstone of international trade, is now facing a massive challenge, one driven by geopolitical tensions from the world's most powerful nations, China, Japan, and Russia. As these countries work to bypass the dollar in favor of their own currencies, the very structure of global finance is starting to shift. But what does this mean for you? Higher inflation, rising costs, and potential economic instability are just the beginning. This challenge isn't just a theory, it's already happening. China's economy is now the second largest in the world, and it has been strategically stockpiling gold, with over 100 tons added in 2023 alone. Similarly, Russia has been diversifying its reserves, selling oil to countries like China and India in currencies other than the dollar. Moreover, Japan, largest buyer of U.S. treasuries, has started to sell off U.S. bonds as an action to lower interest rates in the country. If this trend continues, we could see the dollar lose its status as the global reserve currency, leading to higher interest rates and volatile oil prices. The ripple effects would be felt globally, impacting everything from fuel costs to international trade. The tension between these two nations could be the beginning of a new financial era where the dominance of the U.S. dollar is no longer guaranteed. What does this mean for you? Higher costs, greater instability, and a financial system that is far more unpredictable than ever before. Stay tuned as we break down the forces at play and how this shift might impact your daily life. For decades, Japan has been one of the largest buyers of U.S. treasuries, supporting America's financial stability. However, this trend is now reversing. Japan's government has recently embarked on an unprecedented sell-off of U.S. bonds. This shift is primarily driven by higher interest rates at home. In March 2024, Japan's Bank of Japan (BOJ) raised interest rates for the first time in 17 years, signaling a significant change in its monetary policy. The BOJ's decision to end its negative interest rate policy is a reflection of Japan's desire to strengthen its economy and regain control over its financial situation. Japan's growing defense, spending, and economic revitalization plans under Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba require more liquidity at home. Moreover, Japan is increasingly uncomfortable with the U.S. foreign policy. Especially in the Asia-Pacific region, Japan's strained diplomatic ties with the U.S. over its aggressive stance toward China have added another layer of complexity to this shift. Selling off U.S. bonds isn't just an economic decision, it's a strategic hedge against rising regional tensions. As a result of Japan's sell-off, the global bond market is being shaken. This could lead to increased borrowing costs for countries and businesses that rely on U.S. debt, affecting everything from home loans to auto loans. In particular, interest rates on loans and mortgages may rise, making it more expensive for individuals to finance major purchases. Now, let's look at Saudi Arabia, a key player in the global oil market. For decades, Saudi Arabia has maintained its oil trade exclusively in U.S. dollars, reinforcing the so-called petrodollar system. However, recent developments indicate that this partnership may be weakening. In 2023, Saudi Arabia signed a series of major trade and energy deals with China, including discussions on accepting the yuan for oil transactions. If Riyadh decides to price oil in yuan, this would directly challenge the petrodollar system and could have profound implications for the U.S. dollar. The political tension between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, especially over issues like human rights concerns and disputes regarding OPEC production cuts, has strained their alliance. On the other hand, China offers a more stable trade partnership with fewer political strings attached. If Saudi Arabia moves forward with yuan-based oil pricing, it would send a clear signal to other oil-producing nations to diversify their reserve currencies, further challenging the dollar's dominance in global trade. The implications of Saudi Arabia's decision could be far-reaching. If the petrodollar system collapses, the price of oil and energy could become more volatile, potentially leading to fluctuating gas prices. People around the world could feel the impact through higher transportation costs, inflation, and economic instability, especially in countries dependent on oil imports. Another factor eroding the U.S. dollar's dominance is the rise of alternative reserves. For years, the dollar was seen as the global reserve currency, but this is no longer the case. Central banks around the world have been stockpiling gold at record levels. According to the IMF data, global gold reserves reached an all-time high in 2023. For example, China added over 225 tons of gold to its reserves as part of its strategy to reduce its reliance on the U.S. dollar. Similarly, Russia and India have also been boosting